What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another Infinite Painter tutorial, where today we're going to use some of the watercolor brushes that are built into Infinite Painter to create this really beautiful scene here. Now, as always, there's links to everything you're going to need in the description down below. There you will find links to the palette so you can follow along with the exact same colors. You'll find the canvas size and anything else that you may need. If you're using a different app, of course, the brushes will vary, but there's also a link to the image palette, so you can go ahead and follow along with the same colors as well by importing an image into your app of choice. Now, please make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new here and you haven't yet done so. Helps me out a bunch. And if you want to, you can also become a member of the channel. You'll get early access to these tutorials as well as a loyalty badge beside your name that grows over time. And you'll also be supporting the work that I do here. And there's also some exclusive posts and content for you as well. So make sure to check that out using the link in the description down below. Enjoy today's design and let's get started. So we're going to get started with a canvas that is 2000 by 2000. We'll hit create. So we've got our blank canvas. We're going to go ahead and start with some of the line work. Now you're going to want to go down to the bottom left here towards your color tab here, tap on it and then tap on this pill here. And you want to of course change it to today's palette, which is watercolor 1. Now there are multiple ways in the description down below of how you can get the palette into Infinite Painter. So check out that video if you need any help. And then we'll grab the first color in the palette. And our brush wants to be set to ink bleed under watercolor. And our brush size is going to be set to around about 6 to 8 to start with. It's totally up to you what sort of size range you go for, but something around about 6 to 8 will do the trick. So I'm going to go for something in the middle, about 7. And again, we're using the first color in the palette. Now we're going to go ahead by taking a look at my opacity and flow before we do that. That's 100, 100. We're going to go ahead and draw in a horizontal line across the screen. So a little something like this, and hold your pen down to get a nice straight line. It will go from inky to non-inky, so maybe you just run your pen a little bit along that at the beginning anyway, just to get some color running across it a bit more. Now notice how if I draw in a line here, look at the very beginning here, it's starting to just allow its color to bleed, and also it fades off very quickly. We're going to use this as a very quick and easy kind of marker style for today's design. Now we're going to go ahead and draw in a new layer. This is going to be a temporary layer because all I want you to do is just kind of draw in a bit of a mound here as a bit of a guide for where you want to lay things out. So a little something like that, and then tap on this and bring it all the way down to about sort of 12 to 13%. It's only temporary. We're going to create a new layer. We're going to go ahead and draw in our arch to start with. So you're going to want to go ahead and just create like a line making its way upwards with a little bit of a curve to it. Will look really nice. So a little something like that, slightly higher on one side, and then you can go ahead and just draw in a bit of a curved arch at the top, a little something like this, and then again draw in another one, and then one more, and then just make sure that they're nice and parallel to each other. They follow a similar kind of style and nature to one another. Potentially they're a bit too close, so maybe you want to go ahead and just separate them with a bit more of a gap. So just keep trying until you get it right. It won't go first time. As you can see, it hasn't gone first time for me either. And you want that kind of inkiness to it, where we want that loose styling. Now, once you've got your arch in, we can then create a new layer. We can go ahead and draw in our tree. And again, we're using that basic line as a guide. So what we're going to do is we're going to just create curved little shapes like this. Just lots and lots of curved shapes, the bumps and the lumps, the contorting of our tree. And just keep creating little curves outwards like this. And then we want to run a branch all the way along over the top of our arch there. Now it can have a lot of bleed. It doesn't necessarily have to have any at all. You can do it in lots of small sort of movements as well. Now I'm going to add in another line there. And then we're going to go ahead and just bulk out the tree a little bit more. Now I'm actually going to make the brush size a tiny bit smaller. I'm going to bring it down to 4.5 there. And just create some new curved lines here for the tree trunk. So I'm going to go ahead and draw it in here, and as it makes its way down and in towards the land here, I'll create some new curvy lines here for the roots as well. So just take your time and see what kind of shapes you can come up with. Something simple like this, and then the odd little line that runs through, just to break them up a little bit, and maybe even a curve here before we make our way over towards the right hand side here, where I'm going to go ahead and just create another very inky, very simple kind of tree-like shape here. followed by some additional curves maybe up here as well. Now I'd urge you to leave the top area because we can come back to it. So we will introduce more of these shortly. For now, we just need to go ahead and just sort of identify a bit more of the tree trunk and into those branches. Now from there, we can then go ahead and create yet again another new layer, and then we can start filling in the gaps. So for example, we can go ahead and create like a rock here too, and maybe another rock there. Now for me, my arch actually needs to move. I'm going to tap on my arch. I'm going to go to my create tools and edit and basic transform and just move mine across to this right hand side a bit more. Then I'm going to go back to that top layer with those new rocks that we created. And I may even just drag one of those on a little bit more. Then we'll go ahead and leave a gap. You want your individual shapes to have like a little bit of a white gap in between them, just to keep them nice and separated, and then another rocky bit there towards the back. And then over here, we can just go ahead and run like a line down here along to the ground. Now, potentially we maybe want to do that in like multiple variations, a little something like this, just to give our ground some interesting look to it. And then from there, we also want to go ahead, I'm going to put it on a separate layer again, because we'll merge all these together in a second. I want to go ahead and draw in the lines, the steps. So I'm just drawing in lines here that are going to make their way through the arch. And then as they do, I'm going to very quickly start to make my way backwards in behind the tree. Now we've introduced a bit of perspective to this. We've gone ahead and we're telling people looking at this, look, it does make its way backwards in behind into a different area of land. Then from there, we can actually go ahead and merge these together. Now we want to get rid of this line here that we made transparent. So we're going to tap on it and delete it, that little guideline we created. Now at this point, I urge you just to triple check you're happy with the layout of your design. But otherwise, if you are, just tap on the top one, merge, tap on that, merge, tap on it, merge, and keep merging all of them. So all of your line work now is on one layer. Right, now what we need to do is create a background wash. So we're going to go ahead and create a new layer, drag it underneath our line work. We're going to go to our brush. We're going to change our brush to the light wash. The size wants to be around about, say, 400. Your opacity and flow probably wants to be around about the 70 to 60 mark, something around there. I've got it set to close to 70 anyway. And the color wants to be set to the bottom of the first column. We then want to go to our layer here as well. We want to turn on the paper texture. So we're going to turn on the texture. The texture that I've got, if you tap on this image here, you want the 7th one here in your presets. And once you've done that, you can see the depth, opacity, and scale. Feel free to mess around with those if you wish. And then on this layer, we're going to go ahead and draw in a bit of a frame. So we're going to go ahead and sort of draw in a square. It's really, really faint because, of course, we're using those really awesome watercolor brushes. So the longer you drag it out, the more faint it's going to get. And I don't want you to go too heavy and too quick with the color. I want you to have a really nice wash to the background. And this is ultimately where we're going to try and utilize some of the watercolor features and textures that Infinite Painter has to add in some cool effects in here. So I'm just very lightly giving a wash. It is very, very, very subtle, but just keep going and layering in some color here and there, building it up. And also switch your color to the yellow, the bottom of the second column, and you'll slowly start to see that yellow tone come into play. And you can put that in behind our main feature there as well, keeping that nice and faint. And we can just keep going. We can keep going until we've built out a really nice, awesome wash in the background here. And I'm utilizing just 2 different tones so that the background has a couple of different hues to it as well. So I'm trying to create like a bit of a square box here around my design and just introducing like just a really nice background wash of watercolor. Now I urge you to keep it on the sort of lesser side in terms of don't go too mad with it too early on. You know, switch it back to the orange as well, just in case you get a bit too much yellow in here, and just keep introducing more and more color, potentially around the edges as well, so that you can somewhat start to build up a bit of a frame. Everybody's will look different. So if yours looks different to mine, I've switched it back to the yellow. That's perfectly fine. Just a really light wash here to introduce some interesting texture back here. But don't be afraid to now start to think about sort of bulking it out a bit more, getting really brave with your application of the color. So you like occasionally you'll have like a a dark bit of the wash. Take your time with watercolor and build it up. You don't want to sort of overdo it too quickly, but a little something like this just to work off of. So we're going to start off first of all with the sort of red tones that are going to sit in our tree. So we're going to go to our color. We're going to set it to the red, top right of the palette. Our brush wants to be set to heavy bleed again. And we're going to go ahead and make sure the size is probably a little bit bigger just to start with, probably around about 14. That looks pretty good. And opacity is back up to 100, 100. We're going to start drawing in some areas for our tree and the colors that are going to sit in there. Now, I urge you to sort of drag and hold in one motion and just keep creating the tree shape and then layer in more color. So once it starts to die off, get some more color in there, but ultimately you want to have a really nice washed look to the sky. Maybe make that brush size a tiny bit smaller, maybe down to 7 if you want some more precision. And you can still draw in like we would do, but you'll get this lovely amount of bleed in here. And then maybe I'll create like another sort of patch in the canopy here as well, slightly off and slightly lower down. But we really do want that bleed, because the bleed is actually going to help our sort of colors spread in a much more natural way as well. And you're just going to now make your way all the way around the tree. Now, of course, you're probably looking and saying, well, Joel, there's nothing here. We're going to make up what's here. And then that's when we will then reintroduce some more branches shortly. But we're just going to create a canopy in the tree like so. And then just creating like kind of very pointed shapes, and then a couple of like trails out to the sides. I'm really pushing my pen down, trying to let that ink spread in here, and then going back in once it sort of dies down a little bit, and then adding in little random like actual purposeful lines in there with the red tones. And so do a few of them, do a few like so, and then once you're done, move into another area and leave space for sort of some of the smaller elements that we can just cram in, like a smaller little bit of leaf area in between. So don't go too mad, but you're kind of creating this kind of pointed shape, and then like the trail lines off from there. You can make the size bigger if you wish. You can go up to like 11 or 12, if not even larger than that. It's totally up to you. I want that bleed along the edge there so I can hold down and just let the colors spread. And what I urge you to do is I urge you to kind of draw in all of the main shapes first before you go back in and start to detail. So you can get a general idea for the whole shape as well, and how it looks, what areas you think you want to go back into and fill in that look a little bit different, a little bit too odd, or maybe stand out a little bit too much for you. So maybe one in there. And then I think we could start to now think about, hang on, can we try and squeeze one, say, under here as well, a low hanging one? It doesn't need to be very large at all, but just a nice little bit of red in here as well. Lovely. And then we're taking a look at the gaps now and saying, okay, where else can we fit one in? Well, I definitely want to fit one in that's a little bit higher. I want to have another one up here. I'm going to set the brush size a tiny bit bigger again. I'm going to go up to around about the 10 mark. I'm just going to allow that top area here to have some interesting top canopy right at the very top of our tree, the highest area, and then some nice little random purposeful little lines here and there just to add in some more color, and just little flicks off as well will look great. So little curls upwards will look fantastic. So we've got some lovely color in here. And then from there, I'm going to start making my way through all of the other ones, maybe seeing if I can add in the odd little random small area of red on its own. So for example, here, I've got a big area that I think I could actually go ahead and maybe just introduce like a small little bit of the red leaves in here, and then allow it just to sort of get a bit more detailed, and then keep it quite small so that I can go back into the other ones and reintroduce more color and get fairly close to it. Take your time. This one's going to take the longest amount of time. I'm going to introduce another smaller area here as well, and again, all of the little lines that run off of it. Take your time detailing it. You know, you can put some random little sort of small ones that are just hanging on their own, maybe even like a little trail hanging a bit lower. You know, really let the brush see what effects you can work with the brush as well. Maybe you can get some little patches in there like I've just done there, and maybe you can go back in and readjust the general shape of the area. These very small little patches will look really good because they'll break down the solidness of the really big shape, and then you can add in much smaller areas of purposeful detail. So I'm adding in very small little drags now, just in and around what I've already done, just to try and see what areas of detail I can try and squeeze in. Now, some of these areas here, for example, I want to go ahead now and start to kind of flick them up a little bit as well, trying to introduce some more flick style shapes in here, pointing upwards, and it's introducing some more branches in there. Lovely. Introduce some more here too. Now you don't have to fill in absolutely every single gap, but this is going to take up the most amount of your time, so it is worthwhile, really sitting down and introducing some detail here. And also the consistency of the red as well. You want to tap away, introducing some red in your tree, introducing some color. Again, everybody's is going to look different, so even if a friend of yours does this tutorial, or you're looking at mine going, mine looks completely different, that's just the way it was going to work with the color and the brushes that we're using today. Everybody's just going to look a little bit different. I'm going to try and create some more flicks upwards. I want those flicks to start to raise up a bit more, have a bit more of a consistent look to them. I love this one in the middle here, and that's exactly why I want to introduce those little flicks that just make their way upwards out of the canopies, a little bit more upwards on the ends. And it also gives a really nice look, I think, to the bleed of the brush. It just allows it to sort of roll out and up, but with a lot of ink and color. And again, we can spend as long as we want. Let's get in here now. Let's introduce another little small one in there. I'm going to leave it just exactly like that. I'm not going to do too much to it. In fact, I'll add in a bit more to it, but I don't want to overdo them. I'll do another one here, and we'll just introduce some more red. I'm going to make this one fairly dense, so just chucking in loads of ink at this point, and then seeing where else we can let that color spread to, and maybe it does get fairly close to some of the other ones. Lovely. And a couple of small purposeful ones in the gaps, but something like this should be your kind of final approach to it. We're also going to go ahead and, of course, add in colors everywhere else, but let's just go back up to our line work here again. Let's go back to our color and grab the top left of the palette and set that size now to something a little bit smaller. You can tap here and drag down. You see the size at the top there. I'm going to go down to around about 4.9, and now purposely just add in a couple of connecting lines. Now I need to start at the bottom and make my way up so that the lines are a little bit thicker at the bottom and a little bit thinner at the top. So I'll just create like another little branch line here. You can create something really purposeful like this if you really wanted to, like a real purposeful line that connects your branches together. I'm going to go for an opposite curve this time, maybe even another little curve out there. I wouldn't overdo those lines, but just some nice really small details. Even smaller than that, you can go down to a 1 if you really want to, create a really purposeful line in certain areas just to connect them all together and show some more roots and the branches and the tree growing in all the different directions. Let's go back down to our color layer. Let's go to our colors. We're going to grab this color here, top. It's the 4th color in the palette, and we're going to go ahead and add in some light tone to the side of the tree. I'm going to add it primarily on this right hand side. Now I need to make my brush size a bit bigger again, up to around about 5 or 6. I'm going to add in the gray tone here and follow in some of those curves. I'm going to go a bit bigger again, sorry, about 8, just because the brush was a bit small. So I'm adding in the gray. Now at the minute this looks like it's darker, but it's actually going to be our shadow, our highlight tone. So I'm introducing some gray along all of these tops of the roots, etc. Only where I need it though, and maybe like a big patch over here like so, and then maybe a little bit over there as well. And then from there we'll go to our colors and grab the color beside it, so it's the 3rd color in the palette, and now we'll darken. Now we're going to go ahead and introduce some gray tone. Don't forget you can still do it all in one long motion if you want to sort of lower the strength of the ink, so you don't want to go too dark too quickly. And I'm going to run that down and into some of the grooves here where I know, hang on, maybe that would get a little bit darker in the tree. Don't go around some of those shapes that we created, keeping it fairly simple, but also try to draw in some really purposeful lines there as well, just so that your tree has some really purposeful grooves to it and darkness in there, because when you zoom all the way out, those little sort of random dark tones will be really apparent. So let's go ahead and just add in some dark tone here to the underside of some of those roots that we're showing that are just making their way up and away from the tree trunk and onto the land. And something as simple as this will look fantastic. You can run a dark tone though, like along there if you want to, and create just little areas of slight darkness. But don't forget, it's going to be quite tricky to get your highlights back. So don't overdo it with your shadows. They are going to be most important to preserve your highlights. Let's then go ahead and also add in some color to the rocks as well. So we're going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead again and grab this color here. It's the fourth color in the palette. We're going to go to our rocks, and just towards the bottom side of them, just layer in some light gray in here, like along some of here, along some of the steps as well. We're just going to run some lines through the steps, leave some of the gaps though for some of the background wash to come through. And then we'll also change our color to the third color in the palette and just darken them up again a little bit more, just the same way as we did the trees. So just a little bit of a darkness to them. Again, the occasional line through some of these will look great, but don't overdo it. And zooming out, that looks pretty good. I've got some rocks back here, but I want to also introduce some grass back there. So I'm just going to little couple of wiggles of gray. Let's go to our colors. Let's go ahead and grab the green tone now, the second color in the palette. Let's go ahead and introduce some greens. I'm going to put some green along here. I'm going to put some green along there too. And then this area over here is going to be primarily green. So I'm going to go ahead and do a good wash of this in here. But of course, we may need to go back through the previous color as well. So I'm holding my pen down just so that I can really allow all those green tones to kind of blend back into each other and let them get quite diluted before getting a little bit braver shortly with a little bit more green. So I'm just going back through now, and you can see I've overlapped a little bit on this right hand side. So some of those greens now are quite dominant over here on the right. So I just need to go back through here now and just create new patches of green in here. Just some more darker tones, just to really sort of take it to another level. I'm leaving little areas of the wash in the background though around kind of the base of the tree to give me some accents of highlights as well. But here, for example, I'll tuck in some green in there. Get quite dark with some of those, and a couple more sort of patches of it down towards the water's edge. But for the water's edge, we're going to go back to our grey. I'm going to grab the light grey first of all, the fourth colour in the palette again, and just wiggle some grey along the shore there. It doesn't need to be anything specific, but then go to your colours and grab the third colour again, that dark, slightly darker version, and then maybe just some little squiggles and wiggles here and curves and whatnot, just to show some kind of rocky-like shapes down here along the water's edge, like so. Just a little something like this. Keeping it very simple, you don't have to overdo it. We're then going to add in some red to our arch as well. So we're going to go to our colours and grab the red, fifth colour in the palette. It's the only red in the palette. Now, of course, don't forget we're underneath our ink line. So I'm going to go slightly to the right. Now, I do want to make the brush a little bit smaller just so I don't get too much bleed. So around about like a 4% there, just go down it a couple of times, up and down it, just introduce some red. And then I'm just going to chuck some red in that gap and that gap there too, just to give it a little accent of colour, but nothing too strong. What we then also want to do is sort of integrate a bit of a bleed into the background as well. So we're going to keep the red for a minute. We're going to go to our brush and we're going to go ahead and grab the light wash brush. You can also add in the mostly water if you need to, but we'll start with the light wash and we'll keep the red. We'll make the size much smaller though, maybe around about like 100. And then just underneath some of your reds, just lightly, we're just going to start to sort of wiggle our light wash in there just to add in a bit more of a red wash into the background and show how maybe some of those colors are bleeding across the background. So I'm just going across a few of them. I don't need to do all of them, mind, and potentially it will look better here in the gaps just to maybe sort of bulk out your tree a tiny bit more, but leave the white in there as well, leave that background wash. But I just really want to introduce some tones sort of running away from here, making it look a little bit wetter. Then I'm also going to go ahead and grab the green, top of the second column or the second color in the palette, and just a very light bit of green fading its way away from our land here. So just a little wiggle here, for example, in the gap maybe, just showing a little bit of bleed off. Now let's go ahead and add in a bit of a reflection in here. Now at this point you also want to sort of take a look at your background, and while we've got the light wash, maybe grab some more, say, of the orange tone, go to your brush and maybe make it around about sort of the 300 to 400 mark again, and maybe sort of patch in some areas of color here in the background, but trying to leave, see this kind of glow effect that's happening. I'm trying to work around my main feature here and leaving it so that it's got this kind of white glow. I can set it to yellow and introduce some yellow in a similar kind of fashion, and I'll also wiggle it down the edges as well. Like I want the edge of the frame to be quite kind of messy almost. And then we're going to go ahead and go to our colors. We'll grab the color here, top left of the palette. Your brush opacity and flow definitely want to be a lot lower. So let's maybe drop them down to 65 each. And we'll set the size down to, let's go down to around about sort of the, I think we might need to go smaller than that. Let's go down to nearly 100, 120 here. We're going to introduce the reflection. Now you could do this on a separate layer. All I'm doing is I'm going to go along here a couple of times just to add in a bit of a reflection. And then here where my tree is, I'm going to create like a bit of a slightly darker patch there in the middle, keeping it really, really light, really, really subtle. And then I'll make the brush opacity and flow a little bit higher. Now you can be braver, you know, you can do this like with a much more sort of aggressive tone to it, a little something like this. Then go to your color and grab the red, set the brush size to even bigger. Let's go up to nearly 200. And then down here, just kind of creating the general red kind of shape here in the water's reflection of our tree. A little something simple like this, but these lovely patches and just general reflection using some very simple techniques. Now we've got our design. What we can also now do is take a bit of an artistic liberty in a sense where we can start to add in some sort of erasing lines. So we're going to grab our eraser. We're going to go ahead and use the heavy bleed brush, and we're going to set the size to something really small to start with, around about the 4. And then you can just sort of run horizontal lines through the design here to create some water ripples. So maybe somehow, yes, I know these techniques kind of don't really sort of fit with the general real world, but just a few sort of erasing lines in here, maybe a few slightly larger ones a little bit closer towards us, just to create that lovely illusion of water. Lovely, and just keeping it nice and simple. A couple of small dashes here and there will look fantastic. A couple of little tiny dashes across your water here. Now I do urge you though to keep going backwards and forwards. Go back to your brush, go back to your color and set it to the first color in the palette. That light wash again, and just set that maybe a bit smaller down to 100 and get a bit darker along that water's edge, because you do want a good general reflection, and just wiggle it through. Get bold and brave in certain occasions with your reflection where you can. Maybe even you go a bit bolder with the reflection of some of the red tones in here, and a couple of more reds over here. I can see I had quite a low hanging red there, so maybe I'll kind of try my best to try and replicate that shape, but really blurring it out. You could even get in there with some green if you really wanted to, and just add in the tiniest little bit of green along there as well. Just a little bleed of it will look great. It will just add in a little bit more color to it. But again, just make sure you go back in with your eraser and just draw in some cut lines through here with a small bleed brush with your eraser, just a few along that edge, because it will clean it up. It will look a lot more sort of shiny. It will look a lot smarter and detailed, rather than just a big blob. And also it emphasizes the water effect quite a lot. And then at this point you're done. You could go back to your lines if you wanted to, and go to your brush, go to your color and grab the top left of the palette, and using the bleed brush maybe just introduce some new birds in here. So we'll go to heavy bleed, and we can set the size really, really small. I reckon we need to go down to around about 2, and just 2 little curves here and there. So you can create 2 curves like so. So we'll do it again. We'll go from the center up and out, and then maybe even slightly down on the ends as well, just to create that bird-like shape. And then I'm going to go ahead and do one more, I think, here as well. A couple of curves outwards, and then 2 down on the sides. And that just gives you your little birds there flying in the distance. Now, the only thing I would probably otherwise recommend, I'm pretty happy with it. The only thing I would probably do now is grab my eraser, tap on the eraser, and use the, let's go for the light wash, and set the opacity and flow pretty high, well, maxed out, but set the sizing to something maybe around about 300, because this edge of the sort of design's a little bit too kind of perfect for me. I want to kind of rough it up a little bit. I want to sort of erase into it a bit and kind of sharpen up that side profile almost. And then you may end up creating this lovely little kind of squared shape. And Mine's not fully centered, but you could also go ahead and recenter it if you needed to, or it allows you then to go back in with your brush and the same colors, the orange and the yellow. Now you've erased it a little bit, you could go back in with the light wash, set the size to that 300 to 400 range, and just go back in now and kind of create a new border. If you don't like the look of the previous one, you can go in with some really purposeful, just solid lines along the edges, and maybe even keep going backwards and forwards through that kind of process, and just seeing what kind of rough patches and dashes and stuff that you can create in your design in the background anyway. And likewise to the yellow, you could go really far towards the edge of your canvas, and if you do that, just make sure that of course you maybe even reflect the red a bit more. So these are just some final touches that I usually like to leave in a lot of my tutorials, because potentially you're thinking the same thing, and you can just see also what I'm thinking, all these little extra things that we may want to introduce in our design, and then go back in with your eraser, maybe think about, sharpening it up again, going back through it once again and just sharpening up the edges. Sometimes the background, it just needs a little bit of extra love just to make sure it looks and fits the right aesthetic. And when you're done, pinch with 2 fingers, go full screen with 4, and you end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed this watercolor style design. As always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations over on Instagram or Facebook. They're both really good places for me to see your finished work. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more Infinite Painter, High Paint, and other cross-platform app tutorials. And if you want to take your support to the next level, you can now become a member of the channel. You'll get early access to these tutorials, as well as a loyalty badge beside your name that grows over time, as well as some other exclusive members only content. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you'll love this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.